She said she was just going to dinner with friends. So why did the cops call me at 3 a.m.? I still remember how my heart felt like it stopped beating the moment my phone rang at 3:14 a.m. Normally, when your phone goes off in the middle of the night, you brace yourself for bad news. Some emergency with a family member, a hospital calling to say something awful has happened. But I never expected the person on the other end to be a cop. And I definitely never imagined he'd be calling about my wife, Rachel, who had told me earlier that evening that she was just going out to dinner with friends. In that split second, my whole world seemed to flip upside down. I threw off the covers and scrambled around in the dark, nearly knocking over the lamp on my nightstand as I fumbled to answer the call. The officer's voice was calm but laced with urgency. "Sir, we have your wife here at the precinct. We need you to come down." I couldn't find my voice for a long second. I think I just stammered, "What happened? Is she okay?" But the officer wouldn't give me any details. He only repeated that I needed to get there as soon as possible. My mind raced to the image of Rachel injured or crying, maybe in some hospital bed, or worse. I pulled on yesterday's jeans and a random sweatshirt, not caring that I looked half-crazed. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Moments later, I was in the car, struggling to see straight through the dark haze of the night. Every streetlight that passed felt like a personal interrogation lamp. The roads were empty, but it seemed like every red light was taunting me, slowing me down when all I wanted was to get to her. My thoughts spiraled. Was she arrested? Did she witness something bad? Did she get into a fight? None of it made sense. Rachel was the kind of person who hated confrontation. She was warm, sociable, always smiling when she met someone new. She volunteered at a local animal shelter on weekends. The idea of her being in trouble with the law was as bizarre as anything I could think of. It felt like an eternity before I finally arrived at the precinct. My hands trembled as I killed the engine and rushed inside. The harsh fluorescent lights, the scuffed linoleum floors, the stale odor of old coffee, it all felt cold and alien. An officer behind a tall, scratched-up metal desk glanced at me with that half-lidded look you see on people who work night shifts, the look that says they've seen far too many tragedies and heartbreaks in the late hours. I blurted out my name, told him I was there because of the phone call, and he simply pointed down a hallway. When I reached the end of that hallway, I saw Rachel sitting on a plastic chair outside an interview. Her eyes were ringed with smudged mascara, her hair disheveled, and her posture tense. She looked up at me, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. I rushed over, knelt beside her, and grabbed her hands, but she barely had the strength to squeeze back. I wanted to demand an explanation, but the fear in her eyes made me bite my tongue. "Are you okay?" I whispered. She nodded, but her whole expression told me otherwise. A detective stepped out of the interview room and introduced himself as Detective Harris. He gestured for me to follow him back inside. Rachel was left in the hallway, looking impossibly small and fragile. The detective offered me a seat across from a metal table. I didn't want to sit. My body was keyed up and I couldn't imagine staying still. But I did as I was told. He cleared his throat and began quietly. "We're trying to piece together what happened tonight. Your wife was brought in with a group of individuals who are part of an ongoing investigation. She's not under arrest, we just need her statement." He didn't divulge much more, but the look on his face told me it was serious. She claims she was just there by accident, that she was supposed to meet some friends for dinner. But the place she ended up in wasn't exactly a typical restaurant. Those words sent a chill through me. What place was it? Rachel had only mentioned a new bistro downtown. My mind wandered in circles, trying to reconcile what the detective was saying with what Rachel had told me. "So, can I see her? Can I take her home?" I asked, my voice cracking. He hesitated a moment, then said, "We'll talk to her again in a few minutes, but I don't see any reason why she can't leave once we've finished. Just be prepared for a lot of questions in the coming days." His tone was sympathetic, like he'd seen variations of this scenario countless times. I found Rachel again, and this time I carefully pulled her into my arms. She tucked her head against my shoulder like a scared kid. "What happened?" I repeated, more gently. She mumbled something about meeting up with her friend Lexi, that they were supposed to have dinner at a quiet little bar and grill, but ended up with some other people. She insisted she didn't know them well, that Lexi dragged her to this strange after-hours spot. "I swear I didn't realize that it was a place under investigation," she said, her voice trembling. I believed she was frightened. That was obvious. But the detective's words were echoing in my head. Was there more to this story than she was letting on? We left the station sometime near dawn. The sky was just beginning to light, a pale gray swallowing the last of the stars. We drove home mostly in silence. She stared out the passenger window, arms crossed tightly over her chest. I tried to keep glancing at her, hoping she'd look my way, but she never did. When I finally parked in our driveway, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't want to worry. It was supposed to be just a quick meal." But everything got out of control. I'd known Rachel for 5 years by that, married for 3. We'd had our ups and downs like any couple, but never anything this extreme. Normally, she'd get excited about small things. Trying a new restaurant, going to a friend's birthday, volunteering to walk dogs at the shelter. She was open and honest, sometimes to a fault. But now there was this guardedness in her eyes, something I didn't recognize. And I was petrified because it hinted at a hidden side of her life that I knew nothing about. We stepped into the house. It felt strangely alien, as if the furniture and pictures on the walls belonged to some other couple, a place stuck in time before the night's chaos. The silent walls seemed to demand answers that Rachel either couldn't or wouldn't give. She told me she was exhausted and needed to sleep. I wanted to press her, to get every detail, but I could see how shaken she was. So I let her go to bed, and I stayed in the living room, the darkness slowly shifting to daylight. My mind replayed the detective's words, the memory of Rachel's haunted expression, over and over until I couldn't bear it. Later that morning, I heard her stirring. She came downstairs looking pale, no makeup, her hair tied back in a messy knot. There were dark circles beneath her eyes. I'd barely slept, and it showed. We stood there awkwardly in the kitchen, neither of us knowing how to start. Finally, I broke the silence. Rach, please, I need you to tell me everything. I just spent the last few hours imagining every worst-case scenario. She rubbed her arms, as though cold, and took a deep breath. She explained how Lexi, her friend from college, had called out of the blue. They used to be close but had fallen out of touch. Lexi invited her to a get-together to celebrate someone's new job, but didn't mention it would be at a shady location. Rachel admitted she was excited to reconnect, so she didn't ask too many questions. We ended up at this after-hours club. It didn't even look legitimate. It was in some sketchy part of town. I wanted to leave, but Lexi convinced me to stay just for one drink. Next thing I knew, there was a commotion. The police burst in, and that's pretty much it. They were doing a raid, apparently. Her voice trembled. But there was still something about her story that felt incomplete. What about the people you were with? The detective said they've been investigating them. Rachel hugged herself and avoided my gaze. I don't know. I swear I had nothing to do with them. Maybe Lexi did. She introduced me to these guys, but I only remember one name. Chase or something like that. Her words were coming out in a rush, like she was desperate to get the explanation over with. I wanted to believe her. She seemed genuinely scared and regretful, yet the gnawing feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Something about the whole situation felt too convenient, too vague. But for the time being, I told her I believed her, gave her a hug, and tried to reassure her that we'd deal with whatever fallout came next. She apologized a dozen times and promised she would keep me in the loop from now on. I tried to let it go, but a part of me kept recalling the detective's remark. Your wife was brought in with individuals we've been watching for some time. That didn't sound like a random chance meeting. Over the next few days, life fell into a strange pattern. Rachel seemed jumpy, flinching at unexpected sounds. I'd find her checking her phone obsessively. If I asked what she was doing, she'd say, nothing, and lock the screen. At night, she had trouble sleeping. I'd wake up to find her side of the bed empty, only to discover her sitting in the living room in the dark, scrolling through her phone with a haunted expression. I asked if someone was threatening her, if she owed money to someone, but she always shook her head and insisted everything was fine. Her words sounded forced. I tried to give her space, hoping she'd come around and open up. Meanwhile, my own anxiety was off the charts. I replayed every conversation we'd had in the past few weeks, combing through for signs that she was hiding something. I recalled how a couple months ago she'd started coming home later than usual from work, how she'd mentioned meeting an old friend for drinks. I remembered that uneasy feeling in my chest the first time I saw a strange text pop up on her phone at midnight. When I asked, she said it was just a coworker. I told myself I was being paranoid. Now I wasn't so sure. One evening, I decided I couldn't just sit by. I waited until she went to take a shower, then I checked her phone. I'm not proud of it. I felt like a dirtbag snooping through my own wife's messages. But I was desperate. The phone was locked, though. I sighed, remembering I'd watched her type the password a few nights back when we were at dinner. She hadn't realized I noticed. My hands shook as I typed in the code, praying I'd typed it right. It worked. What I found was a string of texts with a person saved under the name D, someone I'd never heard her mention. The conversation was cryptic, littered with short, coded phrases that hinted at meeting up to finalize something. The strangest part was that these messages weren't obviously romantic. They sounded more like negotiations. One text from D read, "You said you'd have the funds by the 15th. If you can't come up with them, we might need to figure out another way." My blood ran cold. Funds? Another way? This was starting to sound dangerous. I locked her phone and placed it exactly where I found it. My heart still hammered. Rachel came out of the shower, toweling her hair, looking exhausted. I didn't say anything. I knew if I confronted her directly, she'd know I'd gone through her phone. And at that moment, I wasn't sure how she'd react. I felt betrayed, scared, confused. I paced the house after she went to bed, thinking about how we'd reached this point. The following day, I pretended everything was normal, but inside I was churning with questions. By noon, I couldn't handle it anymore. I searched online for a private investigator in our city. The idea felt dramatic, like something out of a bad movie. But I needed answers. If there was some criminal or shady activity going on, I didn't want to drag the police into it prematurely. What if Rachel was in over her head with dangerous people? She might just clam up if she found out I was making moves behind her back. So I quietly arranged a meeting with a P I named Vincent Carter. Vincent was a stocky man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. He listened intently as I recounted the bizarre events of the last Rachel's sudden dinner with friends, the 3 a.m. phone call, the texts from D, her skittish behavior. When I showed him the snippet of conversation I'd copied down on a notepad, yes, I wrote it down. He frowned. Sounds like a debt or something close. Could be anything from blackmail to gambling issues. Hard to say without more context. He offered to discreetly follow up on any leads if I provided him with details, phone numbers, and any addresses I might know. It felt surreal handing over my wife's information, but I was desperate for the truth. Days passed in a tense blur. I went to work, tried to keep my head down, but I couldn't focus. Every text Rachel got, every phone call she made, I jumped inside. She became more withdrawn, almost like she sensed I was onto it. Twice, I saw her whispering intently into the phone, her face pale, before she'd notice me and abruptly hang up. My anxiety soared. I thought about confronting her head-on, but fear held me back. I needed to know the full extent of this mess first. Vincent called me one afternoon, his voice grave. He told me he'd discovered that Rachel had visited several questionable locations around town in the past few weeks, places associated with illegal gambling and rumored money laundering operations. Apparently, there were cameras that caught her entering and leaving with a few individuals, one of whom matched the name Chase. I could barely breathe as he explained it. "Your wife doesn't appear to be some casual passerby," he said gently, as if trying to soften the blow. "She's been to these spots multiple times." I thanked him, but my hand shook so badly I almost dropped the phone. That night, I couldn't keep it inside anymore. We were having dinner in near silence, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Finally, I set down my fork and said, "Rachel, I need to know what's going on. I've tried to be patient to give you space, but I can't live with these secrets." She looked at me, her face conflicted. "It's not what you think," she started. My chest tightened. "Then tell me what it is." "I found messages on your phone, Rachel. Someone's demanding money from you, or else something's going to happen. And I know you've been to more than one shady place. Please, I'm begging you. Talk to me." Tears welled in her eyes. For a moment, I thought she was about to come clean, to explain everything. Instead, she only said, "I can't. You'll hate me." I tried to fix this on my own, but it blew up in my face. My frustration boiled over. "You were taken in by the police, for God's sake. This is beyond just a personal problem. This is serious, and I'm your husband. If there's trouble, I need to know." She shook her head vigorously. "You don't understand. These people, they said if I tell anyone, including you, things will get worse. I'm trying to protect you." I let out a bitter laugh. "Protect me from what? A bunch of criminals? You think they won't come after me anyway if you're tangled up with them?" She lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. She looked more broken than I'd ever seen her. Guilt mingled with anger in my gut. I grabbed my keys, needing some air, and left the house. Outside, the cool breeze hit me like a slap. Part of me wanted to go back in, hold her, promise we'd figure it out. But I was drowning in my own feelings. I needed to breathe. I drove around the city aimlessly, thoughts swirling. Was my wife involved in money laundering? Was she being blackmailed? Had she borrowed a significant amount of cash and then couldn't pay it back? My mind conjured scenarios that all ended terribly. Eventually, I returned home, found her asleep, or pretending to be asleep, on the couch. The next day, she was gone before I woke up. No note, no text, nothing. That morning at work was torture. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message from her, but there was nothing. Around noon, Vincent called again, a sense of urgency in his voice. "I've been doing more digging. The guys your wife's been spotted with are definitely under law enforcement surveillance. They're known for illegal loan operations. Predatory lending, basically. People borrow money, can't pay it back, and then, well, these guys have nasty ways of collecting." Bile rose in my throat. Was Rachel a victim of that? If so, how the hell did she get involved? Vincent asked if I'd spoken to her about it. I told him what little she'd said. He sighed. "Look, if she's in debt to them, they might be forcing her to do certain favors, like help launder money or lure in new clients. It's possible she's not fully cooperating by choice. But the police raid the other night suggests they're cracking down on this ring. So your wife might be in deeper trouble than you think. My hand started shaking again. I thanked him, ended the call, and sat there, staring at my desk. This was spinning so far out of control that I felt helpless. That evening, Rachel came home, and we had another painful confrontation. She was still evasive, but when I told her I knew about the money lending operation, she looked horrified. Did you hire someone to follow me? She asked, her voice trembling between anger and fear. I admitted I did, and she stormed away, furious at the breach of privacy. A moment later, I found her sobbing in the bedroom. I knelt beside her. Rach, please just tell me the truth. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help you. After a long pause, she finally broke down and confessed. She'd had a series of financial problems she never told me about. Credit card debts, a failed investment she'd made trying to help a friend's startup. As the bills piled up, she panicked, afraid to admit she'd made poor decisions. Then Lexi mentioned she knew someone who could help Rachel with some cash. No questions asked. One meeting led to another, and soon Rachel found herself in debt to these criminals. The interest ballooned, and they began demanding payback she couldn't afford. They coerced her into running small errands, passing off envelopes at clubs, transferring money to certain accounts, in return for delaying her payments. The night of the police raid was just one of those errands gone wrong. As she spoke, tears streaming down her face, I felt a mixture of heartbreak and rage. She'd lied, put herself in danger, and now I was entangled in a nightmare. But beneath my anger, I could see how terrified she was, how much shame she felt. She'd never been great with finances, but this was far beyond typical mistakes. She insisted she only wanted to fix things without hurting me, that she'd been planning to tell me once she was free of their grasp. We held each other for a long while. Then I told her, we have to go to the police. We need to tell them everything. The longer we keep it secret, the worse it'll get. She stiffened with fear, but they threatened me. They said if I talk, I cut her off gently. They threatened you because that's how they maintain control. The police are already onto them. If you cooperate, maybe they can protect you. She was shaking, but she nodded. I just don't want them to hurt you, Nick. The next day, we arranged a meeting with Detective Harris, the same detective from that first night. He listened intently to Rachel's story. She was petrified, stumbling over her words, but he calmly assured her that she wasn't the first victim of these predators. He explained that they suspected a larger net. He asked for details about accounts, addresses, phone numbers, anything that could help build a case. Rachel provided what she could, though she admitted she didn't know the full scope. Detective Harris looked grim. We appreciate your cooperation, but I have to warn you, this won't be easy, and we'll need you to stay available for further questioning. There's also a chance these people will find out you're talking to us. We left the station with a sense of both relief and growing dread. That evening, just as I thought we could finally breathe, the unthinkable happened. Our front door was found scratched up, like someone had used a knife or key to carve a warning. A piece of paper was shoved under the doormat. Stop talking. Rachel started trembling all over, tears of panic welling in her eyes. We called Detective Harris immediately, who advised us to stay somewhere safe or consider protective measures. My mind reeled. Our home, the place we built together, no longer felt safe. We spent the night at a motel on the other side of town. The curtains drawn, the lights off. Rachel kept whispering apologies, tears glistening in the glow of the street lamp outside. I held her close, heart pounding. Every creak in the hallway made us jump. In those moments, I couldn't believe how drastically our lives had changed in just a matter of weeks. We were average people. Decent jobs, a modest house, a dog named Cooper who was staying with my sister during all this chaos. Now we were fugitives from some criminal ring. The next few days were a roller coaster. The detective tried to expedite some form of protective custody, but resources were limited, and we weren't exactly prime witnesses in a high-profile case. Meanwhile, Vincent quietly fed me updates. Rumor had it the group Rachel was entangled with was scrambling after the raid, looking to silence potential informants. Rachel lived in constant fear, jumping at every phone ring or knock on the door. Then one afternoon, while I was out buying groceries, my phone buzzed. It was Rachel's number, but when I answered, all I heard was a muffled scuffle and her voice crying my name. My stomach dropped to my feet. I shouted her name, but the line went dead. I sped back to the motel, mind awash in terror. Her car was gone, the door ajar. I called Vincent, I called Detective Harris, babbling that she was missing, possibly taken. My soul felt like it was being ripped out of my body. We reported it immediately. Detective Harris launched a search, though they had limited manpower. Vincent told me he had a suspicion about an abandoned warehouse near the docks, a place rumored to be used by these loan sharks for business. We decided to check it out ourselves, ignoring the detective's caution to stay put. I couldn't just sit there waiting while Rachel could be in mortal danger. When Vincent and I arrived at the dilapidated building, My hands shook so badly I could barely open the car door. A sense of dread hung in the air, the distant sound of water lapping against the docks. We found a side entrance forced open. Inside, it was dark and cold. My flashlight danced across rusted metal beams and piles of debris. Then, from somewhere deeper inside, I heard a stifled cry. My heart slammed in my chest. We moved silently, stepping over broken crates. Another cry, this time more distinct. "Stop. Please." That was Rachel. Fueled by panic, I rushed forward, ignoring Vincent's urgent whispers to stay cautious. I burst into a dimly lit back area where a group of men stood around Rachel, who was kneeling on the floor, her hands tied behind her back. One of them had a gun, and another was shouting at her. They all turned toward me, eyes wide with surprise. Time seemed to slow down. My voice broke as I yelled, "Let her go!" The man with the gun sneered, lifting it in my direction. Vincent, behind me, raised his own weapon, a legal concealed carry he had a permit for. Things devolved into a blur of shouts. One of the guys lunged at me, and I swung wildly, my fist connecting with bone. The next moments felt surreal. Rachel screaming, the men yelling, Vincent grappling with two of them. Then came a siren's wail, echoing through the warehouse. The police had arrived. Detective Harris, maybe. The criminals panicked, scattering as red and blue lights flashed across the dusty windows. Cops poured in, weapons drawn, shouting for everyone to get down. Within seconds, it was over. The men who had threatened Rachel were pinned to the ground, cuffed. I dropped to my knees beside her, fumbling with the ropes around her wrists. She sobbed into my shoulder. I was shaking from head to toe. Detective Harris emerged from behind the uniformed officers, his expression equal parts relief and admonishment. "You shouldn't have come here alone," he said to me quietly. "But I'm glad you found her." Rachel clung to me, face stained with tears. I held her so tightly I almost feared I'd hurt her, but I couldn't let go. My entire body ached with adrenaline and fear. We were taken to the station again, but this time it was different. We gave our statements, me explaining how I'd suspected the location, Rachel describing how she'd been forced into a car outside the motel. The police seemed confident that they had enough to press serious charges against this group. She'd likely have to testify, and that scared her. But at least she was alive, safe in my arms. The days that followed were a blur of legal procedures. Detective Harris helped us get into a temporary safe house while they sorted out the bigger operation. Rachel and I had long talks about trust, about the secrets that led us here. She told me about every mistake she'd made, every time she'd felt cornered by debt and too ashamed to tell me. We cried together, held each other, and I realized how close I'd come to losing her. I was angry that she'd hidden so much, but more than anything, I was grateful she was still alive. Eventually, charges were filed against the main players in the loan shark ring. Rachel cooperated fully, providing evidence of the transactions and the night of the raid. The trial is still a ways off, but the organization is severely crippled, according to Detective Harris. The threat hasn't vanished, but it's receding. Rachel and I moved to a different part of town for the time being, quietly hoping to rebuild our life. The place is smaller, a little more run down, but it's ours and it feels safer. We've talked extensively about what went wrong, why she felt so terrified of telling, how she thought she could handle it alone. She's started therapy to deal with the guilt and trauma. I've gone to a few sessions myself, needing to process the constant fear and anger I went through. Our relationship isn't magically fixed. There are scars. We have a long journey to rebuild trust. Sometimes I wake up at night, sweating, thinking about the moment I saw her bound and surrounded by those men. Sometimes she breaks down crying, apologizing, telling me I deserve better. But I hold her and remind her that nobody deserves to go through what she went through, and that I'm here for her. Strangely, I also feel a sense of respect for her resilience. She got tangled up in something dark, but she never intended to hurt me. She was just overwhelmed, misguided in trying to protect. I've learned the hard way that secrets fester and destroy marriages if left unchecked. We're determined to be honest with each other now, no matter how difficult the conversation. Our story is messy, and it's still unfolding. But at least we're facing it together. The memory of that 3:14 a.m. call, the confusion and terror I felt, will stay with me forever. It was the moment my life split into before and after. The moment I realized how quickly everything can unravel when lies and fear take hold. Sometimes, in the quiet of our new living room, I glance over at Rachel reading a book, her hair tucked behind her ear, and I feel an overwhelming gratitude that she's still here. And I think, had I just brushed off her strange behavior, or confronted her in anger without trying to understand, I might have lost her for good. So that's what happened when she said she was just going to dinner with friends, but ended up with the cops calling me at 3 a.m. It wasn't just dinner. It was a secret life of debt, fear, and desperation that nearly consumed us both. We survived, barely, and now we're slowly picking up the pieces. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you can't hide from your problems forever. They'll find you in the middle of the night, they'll tear apart the life you thought was secure, and you'll have no choice but to face them. But with honesty, and maybe just a little bit of luck, you can still find your way back to each other.